Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fandomology, where fandoms collide. We're back once again with Phil McCracken, but this time around, we are not talking Lord of the Rings. That's going to be a week from this coming Monday. Instead, we're going to be returning to something that we've done twice before, and we had a lot of fun when we did it. And we are going to be going through a music artist's entire discography, looking back on it, and judging whether or not certain albums hold up to the test of time. And so the first time around that we did this, we did Black Sabbath, and I'm still listening to them even to this day. I'm still working on collecting all of their albums. Then we did Kiss, and boy, was that one a roller coaster. But again, I'm still listening to Kiss because of it to this day. And so this time around, we are doing Alice Cooper. And the reason, again, that I chose to do Alice Cooper is because I saw the Metal Mythos episode that Razor Fist did on the Rageaholic channel, where he went through the discography of Alice Cooper. And I decided, you know what? Since he's given his thoughts, let me listen to the albums myself and give my own thoughts. And of course, anytime I'm discovering an artist like this for the first time, Phil is here with me to sort of give some pertinent history to what was going on perhaps in the life and career of Alice Cooper during and around each album. So, a couple things we have to establish about Alice Cooper right out of the gates. Number one, Alice Cooper is not his real name. His real name is Vincent Fernier, and at first, Alice Cooper wasn't even about... He was not Alice Cooper at first. Alice Cooper was the name of the band, but at a certain point, the band breaks off from the lead singer, and the lead singer takes the name of Alice Cooper for himself. Thus, Alice Cooper the band becomes Alice Cooper the man, and we'll talk about that when we get to that album. Secondly, and this is the big one, and feel free to give your own take on this, Alice Cooper's true selling point is his stage show. Alice Cooper is pretty much the guy that invented shock rock. So his albums, at least the ones that I've heard, they're all decent to good to amazing albums just by themselves. But the true selling point is what you're going to see him doing on stage, from ripping chickens apart to hanging himself to quote unquote beheading himself to any manner of just weird and wacky stuff. Right, Phil?
The chicken ripping apart thing was... All right, let's just say it out and get it out of the way. Somebody threw a live chicken on stage. Now, Alice Cooper, his father was a preacher, but also raised animals, farm animals. And Alice knew if he took the chicken, sometimes the chicken can fly. Not for a great long period, but could fly a great long distance. So when he saw the chicken on stage, he took the chicken and was hoping when he threw it that the chicken would fly, away from the audience. Well, this chicken, I guess, had a wish and, did a nosedive and landed near the front row where a person that was in a wheelchair was sitting in his wheelchair, and the kid decided that he's going to destroy the chicken. So that wasn't Alice. That wasn't, most of these legends, there's a kernel of truth, but the true story is different than what is fabricated.
Right.
I will not speak on for knowing for a fact that he ever did destroy chicken on stage. I highly doubt it. But yeah, that incident, that was Alice Cooper trying to get rid of the chicken, as opposed to, hey, I'm gonna tear it up on stage. He didn't tear it up on stage. He threw it off stage. The chicken didn't fly, but did a nosedive. And some kid decided to,
tear it apart.
Tear the chicken apart, What can you say?
Yeah. All right, so real
There's a
quick,
lot
you
of
already
urban myths of Alice Cooper. Other people too have urban myths, but that's
right. It's just part of the fun, honestly. It's part of the aura of going to an Alice Cooper show and seeing what you could see. Real quick, Blazerhawk Darren, by the way, says first time I saw Alice Cooper was on the Muppets, and he also says I saw Alice Cooper at our local county fair, and he was still entertaining. They hung him at the show. When was that? Was that recent, or was that a few years, or was that years ago?
no,
There.
no. He does that. He almost had an accident one time where he went to hang himself, and the stage prop didn't work properly, and almost really hung him.
Oh my.
I mean, accidents do happen, and in that type of setting, yeah, uh, things happen. You know, yeah, but yeah, he always ends it with some form of yeah, his ending. Let's just put it that way.
Absolutely. And he says it was about 15 to 20 years ago. Okay. So relatively recent, but not in like the heyday or of sorts of his career, which that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. So you guys notice in the title, this is only part 1. Usually these retrospectives that we do take like 2 or 3 different parts, except Black Sabbath, which we should have done 2 or 3 different parts. So this is going to definitely be a 3-parter at least. This tonight we're only going to be talking about the career that he had from the beginning in 1969 with the first album to 1978 with the album From the Inside. So we're going to go ahead real quick. Darren says it was during the election campaign of Obama and Hillary. Okay. I'm sure he had some things to say about that. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and get into the very first album. And again, for those that are not familiar with how we do this, we give the albums a score out of 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. We always pick our favorite song off the album. We go into any history around it. And I'm going to do something different this time. I've added a second ranking to it, which is in this day and age, would I spend money to own the album? And that's just a simple yes or no. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the very first album, that is Pretties For You. And this came out in 1969. So from what I learned from the Razor Fist video, which I'm going to go ahead and pull that real quick and put it in the chat for everyone if you guys want to check it out. But from what I learned, Frank Zappa had a hand in, I want to say, producing this album, and he kind of ended it prematurely on them. Would you say that's accurate?
No, let's get a little quick history here. When Alice Cooper, the band, was trying to get a record deal, the man who became their manager tried to get them hooked up with Frank Zappa because Frank Zappa was starting his own record company back then.
And real quick, the guy who was the manager, his name was Shep Gordon, right?
Yep. And the deal was, you guys come at Frank Zappa told him, come at my house at 7:00 and show me what you got. The thing that Frank Zappa didn't say, what's 7:00, 7 a.m. or 7 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So the Alice Cooper band took a chance and went there at 7 in the morning to
Okay.
perform for Frank Zappa. And Frank Zappa said, yeah, I'll give you the job. Anybody that's willing to show up at 7:00 in the morning and try to get a record deal, well, you got it. So I believe he gave them, if I'm correct, say 1, 2, 3, 4, I think a 5-record deal.
Yeah.
I believe it's a 5-record deal, or maybe it might have been a 3. No, hold it. It was a 3-record deal. Three. So they were signed to a 3-record deal with Frank Zappa's record label. So yeah, that's how that came about with Frank Zappa. So if he had a hand in trying to produce their first album, that I do not know. Wouldn't be surprised he started it, but let's say not finish it because he has his own musical career. So let's be honest, being a record producer takes just as much as time producing a record as it is for a band making the record. So
Right. Another thing I learned about this first album is that just musical influences wise, Alice Cooper, both the man and the band, had a huge love for the Yardbirds, which were, of course, in their heyday at the time. Was this when Jimmy Page was still part of them around this time?
yeah, I probably would say if it's Alice Cooper and his band, because of the time, it probably would have been all forms of people that were in uh, the Yardbirds. And you have to remember the Yardbirds, even though they were big and they had some very influential people in their bands,
Mm-hmm.
as a band, they never got signed as the Yardbirds. It wasn't to different lineup and different form that they did eventually get hooked on a tour by the Who, and it was I'm not sure who it was from the Who. It might have been the drummer or the bass player. I'm not sure who it was, but someone from the Who said, "You guys are taking off like a Led Zeppelin."
And that's how Led Zeppelin
And that's
essentially
when they
created.
decided to use the name Led Zeppelin. But just to show how influential the band was, mind you, wasn't signed as the Yardbirds, and again, whatever iteration of the Yardbirds, how influenced people were even here in the States, because I mean, they might have came over here as the Yardbirds, and I'm talking the earlier incantation of the band. Maybe I'm not sure. I have to double check and look back, but maybe Eric Clapton and stuff might
Mhm.
have came over here as the Yardbirds. But
Jeff Beck was definitely a part of the
yeah,
Yardbirds at this
yeah.
point, I
So I
think,
mean,
too.
like I said, there was a lot of famous people. You know, people. There are people even to this day that do know their music history. The singer before Robert Plant, people were very high on that person, and he had plans on forming his own band. You know, he was leaving the Yardbirds,
Mhm.
but sadly he died from an electrocution. Got electrocuted.
Ooh.
That happened to a lot of people, even up into the mid to late 70s, because you were wired in, you weren't grounded.
Same
So
thing that happened to Ace Frehley that
pretty much,
inspired
but
Shock Me.
yep, he pretty much lived. Uh, but like I was saying, that was very influential, and you have to remember that's during the time of the British invasion.
Mm-hmm.
And, you started out, you know, mid 50s into the early 60s. You had you can say the Americans, Elvis Presley, Ike and Tina Turner, all bunch of rock and roll going on here in the States. And that influence over there in England, which in turn, during this time where Alice Cooper's starting to form a band, you had the Beatles, you have uh, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin starting, Deep Purple starting. You're starting to see it's a British invasion. Now,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't mean that here in the States we didn't have anything. You had Clarence Clearwater Revival.
Mm-hmm.
You had other people. You even had your TV music. David Cassidy. It
Yeah.
wasn't that like the American side of music was snoozing,
Yeah, like the
but
like the Beach Boys, for
yeah,
example. That's
even the
another
Beach
thing we had.
Boys. But unfortunately, I don't like some. Let's just say some radio stations made a big deal. All right, other people really didn't care. If it's good, I'm going to listen to it. So when you have what you have, and you had, like I said, on one side here's the British, the American side really had good stuff going, but it wasn't compared to what was going on with the British invasion. And you can credit the Beatles, but you can credit more. It was like a roller coaster. The
Yeah,
Who,
the
then
Stones.
yeah, the Stones, Deep Purple,
Hmm.
Black Sabbath.
Yeah,
All this is starting right now. So Alice Cooper, and you can put other people in the mix. Jimi Hendrix, all starting right about now.
right.
So you get what you would want to call it the American revitalization of music. And you have to remember there's a divide too.
Hmm.
What you would call rock and roll is divided. People have either they become more harder rock
Or they go
or
more blues infused.
blues. And don't forget, this is the time of funk,
Yeah,
you know, and even some you're still having a little bit of the Motown going on. So what you would classify as rock and roll, if you want to classify it as such, is starting to make subgenres,
hmm,
you know, and the subgenre that Alice Cooper picks up on, and he is the creator of it, is what you call shock rock. That means it doesn't mean they don't make good music, it doesn't mean they don't perform, but it's also a show.
yes. So
And
with
Alice
that,
Cooper is the first, just so everybody knows. When it comes to shock rock, he is the first.
yes. So with all of that being said, looking at this first album in comparison to where the band is going, I do give this ranking, for me, listening to it, I give it a 6 out of 10. It is not bad, but you get the sense very much that the band is trying to impersonate someone else's sound instead of try and create their own, or maybe they're trying to create their own, but they're not 100% sure what it is they want their sound to be. They don't have it dialed in yet. That
Everybody
and
is everybody's influenced by something what's going on currently. And what you would say Alice Cooper, the band, is really influenced in these first three albums. Uh I don't want to call it psychedelic. I
Mhm.
don't even want to call it like in the genre of Grateful Dead. But they were influenced by what I would call growing up in the 70s, what we refer to it as hippie music.
Mhm.
They were singing about love and things like that. And, you know, uh, yeah, you paint a flower, and you can tell because Alice Cooper, the band, great band, but these first three albums, you would put that in, you know, that end of the 60s music that was very popular at the time.
Right.
So, but I would call it, if you want to call it anything they were influenced in them first three albums, call it psychedelic.
Okay. So another thing that drags this album down for me personally is the really, really rough production. Like the mix is, to me, not very good. It's not the worst that I've heard, but compared to what's going to be coming along in the later albums we're going to talk about, it's clear that this is basically ground zero and it's just going to get better from here. So 6 out of 10 is my score, and my pick for best song is going to be the song Reflected, just simply because it later gets retooled on Billion Dollar Babies into the song Elected. So Phil, what is your ranking of Pretties For You?
Well, understanding the album because of the time I was born and growing up, and yes, it does not have the sound of what you would call today.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, this was probably state of the art. This would probably be recorded on a 4-track. Today, you wouldn't even use a 4-track to record a demo. But
Right.
back then, you started out, 4-track was very popular. It was like You could go to any city, no matter the size, and there was a studio, recording studio. Now, each recording studio had different abilities. I would say on average 4 track, but you got into the big ones, you're probably looking at 8 and 12 track. It's hard. We have to do one day the explanation about track. And when I don't mean
Okay.
track, I'm not mean an album's track. I'm talking about what they were recording on. All right.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
you're pretty much a 4 track is pretty much taking an old cassette player and hitting the record button. That's pretty
Gotcha.
much what you know. So for 1969, yeah, I don't think they were in the best studio at the time, but it
Right.
was, I would say, a decent studio to go to. And look, a studio is better than no studio. You know,
True.
you joke around and say garage recordings, but that's the lowest of the low. You would have your garage recordings that you would pass around your neighborhood. They ain't going to sound that great.
Mm-hmm.
Be decent, but at this time, you had two options. You didn't have a cassette recorder at this time. You went into a studio and what you can afford to pay. So, I'm not sure the conditions and what they had to do, but for its time, it was okay. It wasn't great, but you know, it is what it is. I mean, for me, I don't have a problem listening to that album front to back. Uh, Mine would be BB on Mars.
Okay.
It's a short track. If you notice on this album, there's a lot of short tracks. There's a lot of long tracks,
And a
but
fair few instrumental ones too.
yes, but I do like a couple other songs, but that's the one I would pick. As far as a rating out of 10, uh, I would give it a 7 out of 10.
Okay. And
It's not it's definitely not the greatest. It didn't turn heads, but it's a good thing to start off on.
okay.
And you know, there's
And
been worse.
then
Let's
yeah,
just put it that way.
and then the and then of course the new addition that we're adding to these, would I in this day and age spend money on it? Probably not. I think for me personally, just listening to it this one time is enough. Maybe I'll revisit it later, but I would just listen to it for free on YouTube. I probably would not spend money on it. Would you, Phil?
Well, being that I was an Alice Cooper fan, I had most of these records. So,
Okay.
far as spending money on them, I think I got most of these the beginning albums back in 79, 1980, and by that time they were into nothing against it. They were into the cheap bin. You used to go into we used to similar stores. They don't exist now. Your Gaylords, your Five and Dime, Woolsworth, that type of thing. Go
Mhm.
into this front of the record selection. There's what you call the discount bin.
Gotcha.
And a lot of times, after 5 or 6 years and mass producing, which record companies did a lot of mass producing, they end up going into the discount bin. So what you might have paid for an album and let's say brand new in 1969 might have been like $5.
Hmm.
Uh, Discount bin, 1979 might still been about $3, $4. You know, or some people they buy the record, didn't like it for whatever the reason. Even yes, back then there was a discount secondhand record store that you could go and buy records.
Okay.
You know, again, you have to remember we're talking 1969. You had two options: you listen on the radio or you had a record player. That's it.
Gotcha.
So
Okay. So with that, then let's move on now to the next album, which came out in 1970, Easy Action. So this is another one that was done on Frank Zappa's label. And I will go ahead and say this. It's definitely a step up from the first one, but again, we're still evolving into the Alice Cooper band that everyone knows, and we're not quite there yet. So any relevant history with this one, Phil? Easy Action?
I would say it was just they were on. Most of the time these bands are on tour, and most of
Okay.
these times they're producing and making a record as they're on tour. And if I remember correctly, this is an example of an album that was made during their tour. They've grown, they learned a little bit better,
Hmm.
but I would say I wouldn't say, this is my first Alice Cooper album that I bought. All right.
Okay.
But being that, you know, I it's hard to find one song that you would say, I can listen to that 5 or 6 times in a row. No, no.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, just for me, like I said, it was better than the first album, but it just doesn't have, it's a good attempt, but I would classify these first three as albums. Well, first two definitely garage recordings. All
Okay.
right. I mean, if there was ever a chance to remaster docker them up, yeah, even at that point, no, no.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see how much you could do with especially the last album, as almost demo-ish it
Mm.
sounds in its
This,
production.
this is for people. If you're not a hippie, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
And if you're not psychedelic, and the only people I can compare psychedelic music to is the Grateful Dead,
Jimi
music that you
Hendrix.
hear in Austin Powers. That's
Yeah.
psychedelic. All right.
Okay.
Now, unless you get that, then you're not going to understand this. This is pretty much psychedelic music was kind of like a short period of time. I would say from like 65 to 70 in its heyday.
Right.
But it was kind of like what you would think today as disco. I mean,
Okay.
not that they're similar, but genre. Disco had a certain point of 4 or 5 years, and then after that, it just faded. Well, same thing for the psychedelic music. The only band that kept the psychedelic music going was the Grateful Dead. And the reason their albums didn't sell, but their tour was very popular, was because other things were going on during the concert.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not knocking the Grateful Dead. I'm not knocking the band. I'm just saying their albums never sold, but their concerts tend to sell out.
Right.
Go, and they know why.
Ex-
Anybody at that time that ever heard the Grateful Dead knows what I'm talking about.
right.
So
So with this album, Easy Action, my score is a 6.5 out of 10. Like I said, it is a step up from the first album, but a small one. Best song for me is going to be the very first one, Mr. and Misdemeanor. And would I spend money on it in this day and age? Again, my answer is going to be no. So what about you, Phil?
I would say I would give it a 6.5. Why it's better, it just doesn't have any song that you could say, this is a song from this album. And even the
Right.
other one we kind of struggled with, but there's one that I could say for me that I liked. On this album, there's no song on it that I could say, I love. I can listen to the album in any entirety. Uh, and I would say the album is decent. For me, a 6.5 or a 7 is a decent album. But
Okay.
as far as a song that I could say, oh, you got to listen to, no. I would say it's the way to do it. And the only reason you would do it is you're an Alice Cooper fan and you wanted the first couple of albums. So it's like you got to get the first, second, and third. And the only reason you're doing it is because you're a real fan of Alice Cooper and you want it. But for an everyday Joe or a casual Alice Cooper fan, and I'm speaking man, not band,
Mm-hmm.
this is not something for you.
Agreed.
All right.
So let's go ahead then and move on to the next album. Actually, hold on. No, before we move on from Easy Action, I do want to mention one thing that this album has that the previous one does not. And that is that Alice Cooper starts to rough up his voice a little bit into that growly type vocals that he would later come to be known by on the future albums we're going to talk about tonight. But with that, let's talk now about Love It to Death. And with this album, a very, very important person in the lore of Alice Cooper comes in, and that is producer Bob Ezrin, whom we've talked about before when we talked about Kiss. But this is where Bob Ezrin's notoriety really begins. Is that right?
He had a hand in the first two. Now, how much of a hand and control he had, I cannot tell you. But this is what put Bob Ezrin on the map. This is what starts getting people's attention. And let's just say you see a more structured album, you see a different Alice Cooper band than the first two. Let's say they learned from their first two albums.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely hits in this album.
Oh, yeah.
Difference that I could say from the previous album.
This
And
is the
Bob
album that
Ezrin,
has I'm 18 on it.
yes. And you can take whatever you feel from that song, whatever you think it stands for. But it's I could tell you this. I'm 18 was played heavily from the time it came out all the way up until the late 80s, early 90s. You heard it everywhere. If you were at you were going to a sports event and they're playing music from just basic songs,
Mm-hmm.
you would hear it in the beginning, maybe at the end. You would people would call up and your local radio station, they want to hear I'm 18. you know it was a huge hit. Now mind you, I was born in 71, but I could
Wow.
tell you, remembering as a kid being 4 years old in 75, 76, 77, 78,
Mm-hmm.
I'm 18 was on the radio station. If that had to been still be playing during that time, maybe once every 3 hours, and that's a lot.
That is an awful lot. I'm sure
And
people.
mind you, at that point in 77 and 78, that song is 7 years old.
Yeah. And by then Alice had written even bigger songs
Yeah.
too, like School's Out or anything off Billion Dollar Babies. And that song and I'm 18 is still getting requested. In fact, that I'm 18 is my pick for best song off that album. I'll go ahead and say it. I give this album a 7 out of 10. And would I spend money on it? Honestly, yes, I would, just for that song.
There, to me, with Alice Cooper, again, you could say this album was where he became the Alice Cooper we know. This is, you could almost say, you would wish this was the starting album for
Yes.
Alice Cooper. But that being said, and I love I'm 18, I love that. song. The rest of the album doesn't match up to that song. While
I
good,
tend to agree.
I I, I,
And
I don't want to call it filler. These songs are not fillers, but they're a step above being fillers.
right.
Normally you might have an album that's great. Uh, Maybe you might have two or three songs.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, we're talking about 1971. And at that time, you weren't able to record a song off the radio. You didn't have a cassette recorder.
Right.
And so you had two options. If you love a particular song, but not the album, you would go get the single, the 45. All right.
Right.
And you would just play that. Or you would just spend the extra couple of dollars and you get the whole album. And a lot of times people were buying albums based upon, well, definitely just Love It to Death, just for the one song, I'm 18.
Right.
Okay. Uh, but this album, I believe, is the first one of Alice Cooper, the band, that made platinum. I believe
Okay.
this went platinum, if I'm correct. I had to check up and look, but I believe it did go platinum. Yes, it did go platinum.
Okay.
So this is his first time going platinum. Now, mind you, a lot of bands, they go back and then they can say, well, our first couple albums didn't make it when they first came out, but because of my popularity, they have now reached gold status. If you look
Right.
at the first two albums of Alice Cooper, they never achieved gold.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But this album is the kicker off. And platinum, now I know a lot of people, especially turning into the late 80s into the 90s, platinum was not in today's world. Well, maybe today's world since the music industry destroyed, but platinum was a big deal in the 60s and 70s and in the 80s. Late 80s, early 90s, while platinum was good, they wanted multi-platinum albums. They want you to be, your record company wants a 3, 4, 5 million sold. You see what I'm saying? So platinum later on, they don't look as high as they did back in then. But in the 70s, having a platinum album was a big deal. Very big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when you can say, yeah, I have gold records, that's great. But when you can say back then I have a certified platinum album,
That's huge.
that's huge. Even if the next album didn't make platinum, only made gold, most of the time another record company will snag you in a heartbeat because you previously had a platinum album, and chances are you will once again get to that status. That's what they're hoping for.
Right.
So, but I'll stop rambling and I'll let you go on.
So before we move on, what is your ranking out of 10 for Love It to Death? And do you have a different pick of the litter other than I'm 18?
The only other song that I like is "It's My Body."
Okay.
And Alice Cooper has gone back many times, not all tours, but will do that song occasionally.
Okay.
But I would say my favorite out song is "I'm 18." The album I would rate as an 8. Songs are great, but they're not. I won't call them filler songs, but I wouldn't call them hits. Like I said, they're the only two songs on this album I could say, in any type of single style out of a single, "It's My Body" and "I'm 18." But
Okay.
I will give it as a whole an 8, which is really good. Okay, it's really good. But the other songs, this could have been a lot more if he had like I think a third single in one of these songs. But
Mm-hmm.
I know some people love the song "Caught in a Dream." That was isn't. I will take "It's My Body" over it any day of the week.
I gotcha.
So,
All right, time to move on to the now. Actually, real quick before we move on to the next album, I'm gonna really quick bring up the cover for "From the Inside" because we need a visual here. So look at the makeup, of course, that Alice is wearing. This is the makeup everyone knows him by. Around what time did he start putting this on?
I would say, as far as I could remember and recall, I think he starts doing that around "Welcome to My Nightmare." Is possibly maybe even before. But if you notice something in the image, if you throw it back up,
Yeah,
and Kiss was inspired by it,
of course, but
that's
they went
not,
way further
yeah,
than he
that's
did.
not black makeup that you see him wearing there. Okay,
That's
that's different.
blue.
Yeah, Alice Cooper doesn't use this purple. Even back then, he quickly switches to just black. And as far as the lines around his mouth, he tend to get away from that. Uh,
Right.
but the
Uh
little, you want to call little roundy eyes, yeah.
huh.
But he just simply went to black. Guess
Right.
black's a lot easier and easier to obtain.
I think
But
personally, the reason that this particular image looked blue is it was just that whole picture was in a blue tint for the cover.
probably. But yeah, I mean, let's just say that's a step up. I'm guessing here. Let's say this is like that image is 73,
Hmm.
74, because once you get into uh "Welcome to My Nightmare," he changes his image a little bit. Not by much,
Okay,
but he does change it up. But
gotcha.
go ahead and go on.
All right, so next album, and anyone that is scared of snakes, look away now. Next album is Killer, and look at that beautiful boa constrictor or ball python, whichever. But anyways, this album came out also in 1971, and this is yet another step up from the previous album. And the Alice Cooper band is starting to really get their ground as far as who they are, who they want to be. And if I'm not mistaken, even live, this around this album or the previous one is when they really start going showmanship with what they're doing on stage, where Alice is beheading himself. I think he hired a magician called the Amazing Randy to help facilitate that, right?
Yeah.
So was that around this album or was it the previous one, or have we
It's
not
right
gotten there yet?
around this album, in between this one and I would say "School's Out."
Okay. So this one again is another one that Bob Ezrin, pretty much Bob Ezrin has something to do with, I would say, all but two, debatedly three of these albums. This is one that he did have something to do with, and I'll just go ahead and say it. My ranking for this one is an 8.5 out of 10. Wait, no, I got ahead of myself. 8 out of 10 for this one. Best song is the opening song, "Under My Wills." And would I spend money on it? Yes.
I would say for me, this is Alice Cooper as we are starting. Well, as we know it, he's starting, but this is who we know as.
Hmm.
This album is heads over heels over the previous three.
Agreed.
Like I said, the saving grace of the one before us is "I'm 18." Okay.
Hmm.
But these three singles, "Under My Wheels," "Be My Lover," and "Halo Flies," is still very popular. Even though the third one, you can replace that with, for me, "Desperado." All right.
Right, which, if I'm not mistaken, was a tribute to the singer Jim Morrison of The Doors.
Yeah. Now, "Halo Flies," I don't know why they selected that, because that's like an 8-minute length song.
Yeah,
Back then, that was frowned upon. When you get into the 80s and 90s, there are some songs that, in particular, somebody like Guns N' Roses, they make an 8-minute song.
Mhm.
Michael Jackson does an 8-minute song.
Yeah.
Back then, that's frowned upon. They wanted you to keep within the 5. You might be able to get a 6, but you do not want an 8-minute song. No, no.
Which is funny because in 1975, I want to say Black Sabbath is releasing a 9-minute track on the album Sabotage in the form of Megalomania.
Yes, but you notice it wasn't a single.
True.
Okay. But I would say Under My Wheels and Be My Lover are the top 2 on this album. I would push for Desperado. Uh, Desperado seems to be a hidden gem.
Hmm.
Okay. Uh, Once a Blue Moon, it might get performed. Once in a blue moon, some odd person might put it on a radio station. But if you ever listen to Desperado, I would put that as the top 3. And finally, Alice Cooper, the band, has managed to put a couple of hits in their albums, not just one. Now they got, like, you could say 2, at least 3. And the other tracks, I don't feel as filler.
Hmm.
Okay. And the quality of the recording, even though it's 1971, yeah, if you listen to it on an actual record, sounds awesome. Sounds awesome.
Yes.
But yeah, I would give it an 8.5. Yeah. Maybe even 8.7. Let's do it that way. 8.7.
Okay,
Killer is a
that
great
works.
album.
And then, like I said, in this day and age, would I spend money on it? Absolutely, I would. So, next album is, of course, the one everyone who has heard of Alice Cooper, everyone knows this album, School's Out. This one released in 1972. And this one is an interesting one because what you said about the last album, Phil, about Killer, how they had like 3, arguably 4 different singles that were hits, but every other song was good enough not to be filler. This is a different case where School's Out, the song, becomes so popular that it completely at least to me, that it completely overshadows everything else. That's a shame because everything else is still pretty good.
I would say, even though School's Out is an amazing song, and the other songs on this album are good, I think it's a step back. Not a big step back, but a step back. Like I said, the only song that I could say that I really love and I can listen nonstop is School's Out. The other songs are good, but you can go down that list. You don't see a second hit, or a
No.
second single. Again, maybe this was a rushed album because, again, if you're seeing the trend, like some bands, once you're hitting popularity and you're getting 1 million records sold, you're trying to, especially the record company, which played a huge decision on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, this album goes platinum, but the only reason it goes platinum is School's Out. And if you take School's Out, I don't see this platinum. Might be gold. Okay. And that's not
Right.
taking anything away from a gold record. But School's Out is what makes this album. Like I said, if you take that song and you throw it out, this is not a great. I would say the quality of the album went down, and not necessarily the band's fault or anybody, the songwriting or anything. But let's just say it was put out and might not have been as polished as it could have been. All right. So Killer, we're 8.7. School's Out, I would drop it down a little bit to like 7.9. You know, so
Okay.
sorry. I mean, like
Yeah,
I said, that
for me, I initially had this at an 8.5 out of 10, but
mhm.
I'm dropping it down to an 8. And I'm definitely saying that, yes, School's Out is the best song on that album. Although, I do like Public Animal number 9 and Blue Turk also, but I do acknowledge that they are inferior songs. Also, a little bit of trivia for the video game fans that are watching this. The song Blue Turk would later go on to be the inspiration for the Turks theme in Final Fantasy VII. So, a little bit of trivia there for you on that one. But again, School's Out is clearly the king of the whole album. Would I spend money on it? Yes. But, in this day and age for iTunes, I would more than likely just buy that song. Which I know, of course, back when this released, you couldn't do that except buying the 45, but still. All right, so Phil, you said this one's 7.9. So you already gave your ranking. So let's go ahead and move on to the next album, Billion Dollar Babies.
favorite album. One. Let's just put it this way. I should say it. One of my favorite albums, and all right. Since the third album by the band
Mm-hmm.
Alice Cooper, this is now the third album in a row that goes platinum.
Right.
That's a good feat. That's a
And of
good
course,
feat.
Bob Ezrin's still involved. He was
Still
involved on Schools.
involved.
He was
I
involved
would,
on Schools Out too, but we forgot to mention that.
yeah. This album, I would say, is quintessential an Alice Cooper diehard fan
Mm-hmm.
definitely needs Billion Dollar Babies. I would say a person that likes Alice Cooper, if you're going for the earlier stuff, this is the one to get.
Agreed.
Right? To me, this is the best of Alice Cooper and Alice Cooper the band. This is the
I
best.
100% agree. It's the best album that we're going to cover tonight. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that right now. My score for this one is a 9 out of 10, and there are so many tracks that I could have chosen, like Hello Hooray, No More Mr. Nice Guy, which actually No More Mr. Nice Guy is the one that I'm choosing for favorite, but Hello Hooray is amazing. Um, Generation Landslide, I really do like also. And I also like the closing track, I Love the Dead.
I would say there's not a filler or even a step above a filler. Any of these songs could probably be a hit on any other record previously of Alice Cooper and the
Mm-hmm.
band. And if you notice, when you get a good album, you get more than one single, and this one has four. Four. So that tells you how good it was. My favorite one, my favorite song is Billion Dollar Babies. I can listen to that song forever.
Oh
I
yeah,
love
I forgot to
Elected.
mention that one. I absolutely love that
I
one
love
too.
Elected. I love Hello Hooray. No More Mr. Nice Guy is one of my all-time favorites of
Mm-hmm.
Alice Cooper, but the ultimate for me is Billion Dollar Babies. So,
Yeah.
and again, I would say this helped Alice Cooper hit the big time. All right. Uh, I would definitely say here we are in 2024. They need to do a check back on this album because I guarantee it, since this album hit platinum, they
Mm-hmm.
have never redid a recertification. And I guarantee you, this album by now has to be like 5 or 6 million. 5 or 6 million at ease. Uh, but I will tell you, as a kid, I knew more people having this album than I would say the next 6 albums, well, 7 albums, excuse me. More
Mhm.
people had $1 billion babies than they had the other one,
Right.
the other 7. So
And for me, of course, would I spend money on it? Yes. In fact, I'll be honest, I already have. I've already bought $1 Billion Babies, the whole album. It's on my phone. It was that good. So, next album that we're going to talk about is the last one from Alice Cooper, the band, and that's Muscle of Love. And also another thing too. This is this is an album that Bob Ezrin had nothing to do with. And we'll get into that here in a little bit, but I am going to go ahead and say for me, this is a step down. A pretty not a it's the album's not bad, but it is a noticeable step down in quality of the songs from the last one, $1 Billion Babies. But then again, also kind of in defense of the album, if you're just about anything that was going to follow up $1 Billion Babies, unless it was like, well, just about anything was going to be looked at as a step down. Would you say, Phil?
well, sometimes some bands the next album is equal to or close to, but sometimes this happens when you have a streak of platinum and by whatever reason, call it burnout or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, a follow up to a great album tends to be a drop.
Right.
And this is comparable to Killers. All right. I
Mm-hmm.
would say the songs aren't great, though I like Muscle of Love, which has been performed live off and on. Teenage Limit 74, it's okay. Uh, and I do like Woman Machine. But overall, I mean, yeah, this album did go gold, so it didn't hit the platinum status.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why this album went gold. And it wasn't just burnout, which burnout does happen.
Mm-hmm.
Uh bands get burned out, whatever the reason. I think this was more burnout of the band because they were putting albums out, and this one I believe was the same year. Yeah, $1 Billion Babies.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I think, a mistake. Look, some bands can get away with releasing more than one album, studio album in a year.
I believe Kiss did that with the
Yeah.
first album and Hotter Than Hell, right?
Yes, and then they followed that up with Dress to Kill and Alive 2. But, you know, Deep Purple has done that, but they
Mm-hmm.
were making double, maybe even triple platinum, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, but even then, like I said, you only get a couple years, and then that original, the second, what do they call it? Mark
Second.
II lineup, the famous
Yeah.
Mark II lineup, they only did 3 years. All right. Now you got Alice Cooper here in this band, and this is the final one. That's 5 years.
Yeah.
On average, a band don't last that long. Okay. And be it that the first two, and granted the first two are, normally learning, all right, it's definitely a higher quality than the first two albums.
I agree. Production
But
wise
like I said,
alone.
I would put it on par with Killer, even though Killer sold 1 million and Muscle of Love didn't. And again, uh, maybe an album, if they would have waited a year and took more time to polish it up, not necessarily. Yeah, a lot of people say Bob Everton ain't on it, so that's why he didn't get platinum. Uh, Not always, as it has to do with the producer, with the album
Right.
itself. I just think even if Bob Ezrin was on this, uh, I don't see Bob Ezrin being able to do anything other than what they did, and Gold, it would have been no different if Bob Ezrin was doing it. So
Right. So, ranking for this one for me, I'm actually going to disagree with you. I do not think this is on the same bar as Killer. I do think it's worse. I would put it on the same bar as, honestly, the first two albums. So my ranking for Muscle of Love is a 6.5 out of 10. Would I spend money on it? No. But the best song for me is going to be Man with the Golden Gun, which, a little bit of trivia for that one, was going to be the opening credits song for the James Bond movie, The Man with the Golden Gun. But whoever, I forget what the name of the studio is that does the Bond movies at that time. They were going to go with it, but then they decided, you know what, we don't want this. We're going to go with another artist named Lulu instead.
gotcha.
So what would you,
I want to throw in something when you're done real quick
Mhm.
with this. But I'll wait for you to finish, then I'll throw it in there.
I was just going to ask what your ranking was.
My ranking for this album is a 7.
Okay.
A 7.
And if you had, and what's your pick of the best?
Muscle of Love.
Okay.
I know Teenage Limit is some people's favorite from this album, but I'm not a fan of that song. I do like Muscle of Love.
Okay. And then what was the thing you wanted to tack on?
I wanted to tack on real quick, and I know we're not a fan of doing this, but I think I'm gonna add. I want to say this, put it out there: the greatest hits album that comes right after this. If you
Okay.
don't buy, and the first two albums don't have any songs on this greatest hits album, but if you want to get early Alice Cooper, the band, with some of the greatest hits and avoid paying for all these, get this greatest hits album. It's got almost all the good songs on there.
Let me see if I can find a picture of the cover.
Oh, it has one of the best covers that I thought was magnificent. It has Groucho Marx. I'm not sure, is that Betty Davis? I forget who the comedian that's supposed to be there, but you can see Groucho Marx and uh, actors from the early 40s. I mean mid 40s, late 50s.
I think I found it. So let me get this. Is it this one?
Yes, yes. And you see Groucho Marx staring at him. By the way, which
Yeah.
is funny because Alice Cooper, the man, was
Mhm.
great friends with Groucho Marx.
I know he himself has talked about all of those old-time Hollywood people coming to see his shows, and the way he describes it, all the common folk are like shocked beyond shocked at what he's doing up there, but the vaudevillains, as he puts it, they're just watching it and having fun.
Well, it was different, all right. And Alice Cooper, the band, as long as the man, uh, yeah, it was being different. And sometimes you have to remember, if Alice Cooper the band tried to be Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple, you probably never would hear anything from them. But
Mhm.
sometimes eyes do play a big role, and Alice
Whoops.
Cooper playing that role as Alice Cooper, you know, there's something there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
And he, just like Kiss, when they initially put the face paint on and started embodying the different characters that they were, same thing here. Alice Cooper started doing the shocking things that he was doing on stage and incorporating that into his songs, and people loved it. Still
Mhm.
love it. However, like we said, this is the last one from Alice Cooper, the band. So before we get into the next album, where we start talking about Alice Cooper, the man, as a solo artist, we got to talk about what it was that broke up Alice Cooper, the band. If I'm not mistaken, the band, the backing band, wanted to be done with all the theatrical stuff, and they wanted to do something completely different. Alice didn't want to give that up. Correct?
Well, you could. That's part of the reason. Major reason, I would say, is burnout. Doing something continuously, nonstop. And let's be honest, they break up in 74. That's 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, when these people toured back in the day, you're touring them as 11 months out of the year. Okay.
Right.
So you do 11 months out of the year, you do that for 4 or 5 years, you know, that's a lot of time. So, and then constantly, I mean, yeah, you might add a new song from the new album and everything, but it's besides that, same show. And I can understand they're, getting a little burnout. You can tell it had to be burnout because of this album that came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were not firing like they were before on all cylinders, and it
Right.
plays a role. Uh, I give credit to Alice Cooper that said, he wanted to keep going, and it could have been a disaster. Let's be honest, it could have been a disaster,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't. And important things to know is ever since 74 into 75, let's say 75 for sake of argument, from 1975 till today, Alice Cooper has to pay the 4 other members of the Alice Cooper band. They weren't backup band. They were
Right.
a band.
Mm-hmm.
He has to pay for that name. And he pays $50,000 a year. Now
Which,
that's
real quick, I just want to cut in real quick because we forgot to mention who the other people were in the band. We forgot to mention their names. So,
well, unless you're Alice Cooper diehard, you probably don't know who the original members of the band are. But go ahead.
well, I feel like it's worth
Go
mentioning
ahead.
because,
Go ahead.
like with Kiss, we're going to see a lot of lineup changes, and I feel like it's kind of important. So the original band consisted of Alice Cooper himself, aka Vincent Furnier, um, Glenn Buxton, Glenn Buxton on guitar, Dennis Dunaway on bass. If I'm not mistaken, Neil Smith on drums. And I think there was a second guitarist in there. I can't remember.
There was a rhythm guitarist, aka keyboard and background vocal, Michael Bruce.
Michael Bruce, yes.
But let's be a little more similar to Kiss. There's some ghost people hiding around, and one of them people that will come out that did some work on there. You probably hear in there. Is Bob Ezrin's favorite.
We'll talk about him in just a second.
Yeah. But Dig Wagner.
Yep.
He previous 2 albums he did some some work. Look, every band, I don't care who it is, at a certain point they start putting ghost people in for whatever reason. This guy can't play this note, but this one can, so let him play it and put it in there. Now that does not mean them guys didn't go out on stage and perform. Regardless of what's on the album, that person, let's just say, take argument, the drummer didn't play on the song. Let's just say, for sake of argument, it's Under My Wheels.
Yeah.
Okay. So some studio drummer played that drums on Under My Wheels.
Right.
When they go on tour, they still have the original drummer. He's got to now play that drum roll. Now, regardless of whatever they said, maybe this little kick didn't sound right. This little cymbal didn't sound right when he did it. When they're on tour, it doesn't matter. He got to play it. And even if he doesn't play it to perfection, he's still got to play it. So, regardless of when they bring in a studio person or not, the main band has to play to whatever's been done and been
Right.
recorded. It doesn't have to be note for note to the sound of the track, but they got to perform and give them credit. This band, they were decent. They were a good performing band. I would say, it out of all the people joining Alice Cooper later, this was the tightest unit.
I tend to agree. And real quick, hello to Raymond Boschek. I hope I said that right, by the way. Welcome. I believe this is the first time I've seen you around here. Says, went from a band to a solo act. Yes. In fact, that's kind of what we're discussing now, is that transition from that. So I guess that's a good time now to go ahead and bring up the next album, the first of Alice Cooper, the solo act, Alice Cooper, the man. Like we said, Alice Cooper did not want to give up doing the theatrical stuff. And by his own words, he said he decided when he was on his own to go even deeper into it. And that's exactly what we got on Welcome to My Nightmare. So this is Alice Cooper's first concept album. And for those that are unfamiliar with that term, a concept album is an album that has songs in it that when you put them all together tell a story. Now, this is a difficult one for me because I'll admit I'm not the brightest tool in the shed at the best of days. Ask Virginia about that. But I knew going into this album that it was going to be a concept album, and I knew kind of from my research that the concept, it was basically songs set within the nightmare or nightmares of this kid, adult. I really don't know because I've seen conflicting things about that, but of this person named Steven.
Yes.
And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys watching this. The concept flew right over my head. I don't get it. I've tried. I can see where some fit into the nightmare narrative, but then there's others like Department of Youth and Only Women Bleed and such like that how is this related to a nightmare is what I'm wondering.
You have to put it in like a story. Even if you're reading about someone writing about a nightmare, not everything in the nightmare is a nightmare.
Okay,
that's the best way to point it. But it's a sequence of events that this teenage boy Stephen has, and think of it as a story, but with music, a concept album. You can say this is the first concept album, and Bob Ezrin has had a lot of concept albums, but this is his first. This leads to Kiss, Destroyer, concept album.
Hold on, time out. Destroyer was a concept album?
Yes. If you listen to it, it is a concept album.
I mean, I know that. Okay, I'm sorry to get sidetracked. I know that Detroit Rock City has a story to it. It's about a kid that is on his way to a concert but gets plowed over. But that's the only song that
no.
And maybe Beth.
If you shout it out loud, you have to understand the concept. The concept is you being at a concert hearing these songs. That's what it is. It's being at the concert,
Okay, and that makes sense now.
Now the Beth, there are a couple songs in there. Beth does not have anything to do with any concept, but the majority of that album is about music that you would say, and they remember all them songs well, most of them, Detroit Rock City, they were still performing, shouted out
Hmm.
loud. It does go in and out of their touring, but most of the time, Shout It Out Loud was there.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or why they included as the closing track for Destroyer that weird hodgepodge of stuff called Rock and Roll Party, which
yeah, well,
honestly
that's
annoys
technically
me.
they never list that as a tracking. That was just a lot of times back in the day, a band will throw something like that in there. It's not really a track. It's not really a track. So, but it does make sense why, when you understand the concept of a concert, and these songs you were hearing would be like at a concert. But goes on to another concept, Pink Floyd The Wall.
Yeah.
Right now, Bob Ezrin with other people. You see, he was already on a kick with Alice Cooper. There was like 4 albums nonstop platinum. Here comes Welcome to My Nightmare concept. Guess what? This is platinum. Kiss, uh, Destroyer. That's right. What last time they checked for 4 million, 4 million copies? Okay. Pink Floyd The Wall. I don't know how many millions of copies that sold, right? But then you get the destruction of Bob Ezrin with another concept album, this time with Kiss,
The Elder.
The Elder. All right. So you can say his streak ran out. Okay.
Yeah.
But for Alice Cooper, this was major because now he's on his own. And guess what? It's platinum. I would say
Right.
if you equate that to the the late 80s, early 90s, before the collapse of the music industry,
Hmm.
this is way over 1 million copies, at least 3 to 5 million. Today, if
Right.
they would do a recertification and they counted, this is definitely 3 or 5 million copies,
Okay.
at least. This was huge back in the day. Uh, like I
So,
said, there's some people that can say they can listen to "Welcome to My Nightmare" and that's it. That's all they can get from this album. For me, I would put this definitely as one of the top 5 Alice Cooper albums. And there is an important thing to look at. If you go onto the album tracking,
mhm,
okay, and you go to side 2, the very last song, and you'll see these people starting to make their way into the music world. Look at the writer's credit on the last track.
remind me, what's the name of the? Okay, I'm gonna look this up real
Go
quick.
ahead. Go ahead.
While I do that, I do want to mention one thing since we're kind of on it. Since Alice Cooper is a solo artist by this point, he of course has an entirely different backing band with him. And I am going to mention 2 people that come up here. We've already alluded to one of them, but of course you have Dick Wagner playing guitar. Yes, the same guy that Bob Ezrin decided to replace Ace Frehley with on the song Sweet Pain, which I still think was a stupid move.
Hmm.
But all right, what am I looking at for the writing stuff here?
Look
Okay,
at
so it's called
the very last.
the Escape.
Yes.
Okay, so Kim Fowley and Mark Anthony.
Okay, Mark Anthony there. Don't get confused with the guy from Van Halen.
Right.
2 separate people. But that individual there, Kim, I can't say it. I forgot his last name again. What was the last name?
Kim Fowley.
Yes. He was, I want to say, very popular, but he was a known person that could write songs with people. Okay.
Okay.
Think of him kind of similar to a Desmond Child.
Okay.
Okay, so he was right. He Adam Mitchell for like Kiss. You know, he wrote a lot of Kiss songs with Kiss. You know, and helped them out. This
Which
guy is a songwriter. He is
which
helped.
ones did he write with Kiss that I would know?
Not this guy. Not this Kim Polly. No, talking
Oh,
about.
gotcha.
I'm just comparing him to other people that are famous that help write band songs. Desmond Child is probably one of the biggest.
Okay.
Adam Mitchell is probably second. Well, this guy in the 70s, before these two other guys were doing it in a popular setting, him was very popular. Like if you needed help to write an album, write some songs, that's the man you wanted to get. Not Mark Anthony. That's not the guy from Van Halen. Just so you don't get confused. But
Raymond
that.
Boschek here says from Runaways
Mm.
fame. Okay.
So, like I said, he was in the 70s. If you needed help writing an album, there's your man. You know,
Okay.
and I'm trying to think off the top of my head other bands. There's quite a few. Like I said, sometimes I get a blank. But he is, like I said, in the 70s, he was the 70s version of Desmond Child.
Okay. Real quick, I do want to highlight another thing. Mr. Boschek says, my niece painted a guitar with Alice and the snake on it for his charity this year in Palm Springs golf outing. Interesting. And I hope that guitar goes to a good home if it's like an auction item or something. So good on her for that. But as far as Welcome to My Nightmare, my thoughts on it overall, grade wise, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10, just simply because for me, the fact that I don't understand the concept and how it connects to the song, it makes me feel like I'm missing a piece of the album. Because if you take it as just the songs themselves, they're still great songs.
Okay.
They're definitely better than Muscle of Love, but not to me as good as Billion Dollar Babies.
I have to enter this real quick. He did
Mhm.
write with Kiss. He wrote King of the Nighttime World and Do You Love Me with Kiss.
And those are both great songs.
Yeah, like I said, in the 70s, if you needed help, he was a go-to guy. He did a lot of work with the Runaways and other people, but like I said, in the 70s, you need a little help. And like I said, this other one other thing. A lot of times some people don't get their name put down when they're helping people write songs. Do not
Hmm.
be surprised. There's a lot more out there of famous people that he worked with that he didn't get credit for.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
So, like I said, for this one, 7 out of 10 for me. As a collection of songs without the concept, they're good, better than Muscle of Love, but not even close to Billion Dollar Babies for me. Best song of the pick for me is going to be the song Steven. And would I spend money on it? I'm going to say no, but I'm going to asterisk that and say for now. Maybe somewhere down the road, if I get it, what the concept is, maybe then I'll change my mind and get it. But for now, the answer is no, I would not spend my money on it.
Well, I would say for me, especially being a kid at the time when this album came out, it was huge.
Mm-hmm. There was a movie that came with it
Yeah.
too.
Well, not really a movie. Let's call it a music video style movie
Yeah.
with Vincent Price.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I would say for me, I would rate it 8.5. Okay. And I will say my favorite song on there has to be Welcome to My Nightmare.
Okay.
But I will have to say this, while the other songs are good, again, it's another album. The other songs don't knock it out of the park like Welcome to My Nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a second or a third uh, single there. So, if you like the song "Welcome to My Nightmare," I would say wait for another best hits or another greatest hits like we did with the previous four.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Probably you would probably be better off than buying this whole album. But if you have to understand different mindsets. If you're a die-hard Alice Cooper fan, this is definitely a must. If you're a casual Alice Cooper fan, it is a must. But if you're a person that occasionally listens to Alice Cooper, no. It's not worth it to buy just for one song.
Okay.
No. But I love this album. For me, it's a must have.
Okay. So the next album, we're also another thing we got to talk about, sort of personal life wise, with Alice Cooper. By this point, he was unfortunately becoming an alcoholic, and the song "Cold Ethel" on this album is kind of a reflection about that, because at least as Razorfist described it, the song "Cold Ethel" is basically a love song to alcohol. And unfortunately, that vice is going to get worse for him as we go throughout this chapter of the retrospective. And yes, it's going to get worse from here, but we'll cover that next time around. But for now, next album we're going to talk about is Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. And this is another concept album that, of course, Bob Ezrin helped with. But this one, I'm going to be perfectly honest, this one I actually understood. This is basically Alice singing these songs as if he actually was in hell.
I'm going to be a little harder. And I don't know if this is because Bob Ezrin at this time is stretched out thin.
Mm-hmm.
But then, if you look at it, it was a drop. This didn't go platinum, it went gold.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it benefited going gold because the previous album, really here, for me, the two singles doesn't cut it for me. I Never
Yeah.
Cry and Chasing Rainbows. Uh, I do like, for me, the favorite one is Going Home.
Okay.
But I think this album, unless you're a die-hard Alice Cooper fan, this is an album to get. If you're a casual Alice Cooper fan or somebody just off and on, this is album skip. Don't no. It's not that the album sounds bad. It's just that you know you need a gem in an album. This
Mm-hmm.
does not have a gem. You know, so it's a little bit back. So I would give it a 7 out of 10.
I'm actually going to disagree with you on that. I'm going to give it the ranking of an 8 out of 10 and say that it does that, at least to me, by my tastes, it does have two gems, that being the title track "Go to Hell" and "I Never Cry." I actually really do like that song, because that is the song. There's a line where Alice Cooper outright admits how much he is an alcoholic, and it's, at least to that point, the most emotional ballad that Alice had written, and he does it really, really well. Like, everyone goes crazy about how Alice Cooper will sing, of course, the hard shock rock songs like "School's Out" or anything off "Billion Dollar Babies," but when Alice wants to soften himself and sing a ballad, he knocks it out the park, in my opinion. So my pick of the litter is going to be "I Never Cry." Would I spend money on it? Yes. And real quick, Raymond Boschek says other artists came in on the scene and took over. Yeah. I mean, by this point, Alice Cooper Goes to Hell was 1976. That was when, if I'm not mistaken, Rock and Roll Over came out for Kiss, and they were still, even at that
You
point,
you
in
you
their
have
heyday.
you have you have Kiss.
Hmm.
You have ZZ Top. Believe it or not, they were becoming huge. Deep Purple's coming to the end with its Mark IV lineup, but still at 76, 75, 76.
Yeah,
Still huge. You had Led Zeppelin. You had Queen. So, yes, the competition is tight, but this album for me, the quality, just it's good. It sounds good, but the songs are not. I don't even think he performs maybe one song off of there occasionally off of this album, and
that would be Go to Hell that he still does
occasionally, but
sometimes.
once in a blue moon he'll do Going Home.
Hmm.
Uh, it's maybe Alice Cooper after Welcome to My Nightmare probably could have waited a year before putting out another album.
Hmm.
You know, uh, and again, I'm not faulting Bob Ezrin's really busy. So, stretching thin, here he is 1976, he's working with Kiss, he's working with Alice Cooper, and God knows who else he's working with. Probably at this time, Pink Floyd. So, you know, he's thin. And let's be honest, when Bob Ezrin is thin and he's working with Alice Cooper doesn't do great. When
Right.
Bob Ezrin is focused with Alice Cooper and then Alice Cooper is focused, the albums tend to be more of a hit than a miss. Again,
Hmm.
I think this is an album that was to satisfy the studio, the record company, rather than an album that really needed to be out there. You know, But then again, this is how it worked in the 70s. Every year,
Right.
sometimes twice a year, some cases we've seen three times a year. The record company wants a record company wants a record. And this one just seemed to be a little weak for me. So I guess we'll disagree on it. But for me, I would say if you're a diehard Alice Cooper fan, yeah, you would need to have this album. If you're a casual Alice Cooper fan or just wants a blue moon listen to Alice Cooper, I wouldn't say buy. No, wouldn't be worth buying it.
Everything you just said, Phil, about how this was an album that really didn't need to happen, perhaps, or however you said it, to me, that's the next album, Lace and Whiskey. This is probably the only album in this block that we're talking about that I could say that I dislike. And here's the thing, it's not because of the songs, or at least how the songs were written, what he's actually singing about, because this is another concept album. This time it's basically a love letter to Hollywood and the old film noir type stuff. But what I do not like about this album is, to me, Alice Cooper, we already said Alice Cooper is a showman. You watch his stage show and you can tell that right off the bat. But he's also rock and roll. To me, this is where Alice Cooper went full on show tunes. And this is effectively, to me, what I'm sure Dynasty was to the hardcore Kiss fans when that first came out. Basically, a seeming betrayal of his past style that had already been working even on subpar stuff that we've already talked about, like, well, Muscle of Love or Alice Cooper Goes to Hell or Easy Action.
Well, going by sales, they would tend to agree with you because
Mm-hmm.
this is the first time Alice Cooper Band or Alice Cooper Man, like the original first two albums, this album joins them two it didn't even make it gold.
Yeah. Real quick, about the previous album, Raymond Boschtek says Alice Cooper Goes to Hell hit 27 on the charts.
Yeah. But let's just say this. And this is sometimes you have to understand when an album hits the charts, and like it did 27, didn't mean the following week it stayed at 27.
Mm-hmm.
And just because you get a high ranking of an album on the charts doesn't mean it actually sells. You would figure a band that gets number 2 on the charts or number 3 on the charts at least gets 1 million copies sold, if not more, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Kiss's last 2 albums, uh, just as an example, Monster, number 3 on the charts, didn't even make it gold. Kiss, what was the last one?
Sonic Boom.
Sonic Boom, the one before it. No, excuse me, I have back. Sonic Boom made a number 3 on the charts, didn't make it platinum or gold. And Monster, a couple years later, made number 2 on the charts and didn't make it gold or platinum. And previously, the only album close to that got onto the charts, I believe, was at number 5 for Kiss, was Psycho Circus, and it only went gold.
Right.
Then you have to, but here's the kicker on that: 90s, late 90s, people weren't buying records.
This
Okay?
was the beginning of downloads.
And
or like Napster and
you
such.
could say even in the 2000s up and now, people aren't buying records like they used to. So you can use that as an excuse. But there are people on at that time that when them albums were number 2 and number 3, the number 1 and number 3 or the number 4 or number 5 went sold 4 or 5 million copies. So you have yeah, it's a crapshoot. I give it credit. I'll follow with them. Okay, number 27. That's a good, but you don't get an award for being number 27. All right. You get an award for selling 500,000 copies or selling 1 million copies. And sadly, Going to Hell didn't even make gold. That's pretty bad. Okay. So, and let me be correct. Let me be point out this. I'm only going by what's listed in the United States. Could have been a hit over in Europe. It could have sold 1 million copies. I'm saying what it sold in the United States. So, and if we're off to the next album, another disappointment, in my opinion. But
Are you talking about Lace and Whiskey or From the Inside?
Yeah, Lace and Whiskey.
Yeah, this album is, like I said, it's the only album of this block that I could even close to say that I dislike because of just how overblown it is.
Lace and Whiskey is
barely rock.
It's a good song, and he sometimes plays that on tour. Not every tour, but occasionally. But there is one song that I personally love that I don't have a problem listening to it nonstop, and that's My God. I love that song. I love that song. Now, I can't say what some critic will say or what some person says about that song. For me, this is just me. That's one of my favorite Alice Cooper songs. My God. I know it sounds like a church.
No,
you're to sound like a church, but I love that song. I love the lyrics to that song. So,
well, you got to remember, and this is something we we didn't even mention. Alice Cooper is the son of a preacher.
He is the son of a preacher, a preacher himself. He is, again, you got to separate the man and the performer. You wouldn't call Christopher Lee a devil worshiper because he played somebody evil.
Ozzy Osbourne, Ozzy Osbourne, according to my cousin Trevor, who's actively reading his biography, is a member of the Church of England and prays before every single one of his shows.
Yep. What you do on tour or what the image is only to get you the money to work and the job that you need to survive. Okay. Any actor, and let's be musician, if the gimmick, it's just like wrestling in a way.
Yeah.
Once you have a gimmick, you perform that gimmick.
Look at the Undertaker, for example. Everyone was scared of him, and then by comparison, look at Mark Calloway. He is, at least from what I can tell, this just stand-up guy that will talk about anything with you.
Yeah, but remember, as the Undertaker, when he was not in that persona for them first 4 years of his career as the Undertaker, as a member of the Varsity Club or whatever, what he was doing there, Twin Towers. Yeah, you have to find the gimmick, and once you find the gimmick, then boom, it's magical, And for Alice Cooper, to be who he was, to be famous, and to do what he's doing, this is what his job is. And if you think he's actually a devil worshiper, you couldn't be far from the truth. People tried to say he was just because of the image, but the man, he's a preacher, son of a preacher. He has saved some people.
Yeah,
Dave Mustaine.
Dave Mustaine.
Yep. Other people too as well. But, he's able to separate what he does as a performer and what he does in his personal life. And that's how we all should be. When you go to work, you go to work. You're not there to make friends. You're not there to be popular. You're not there you're doing a job. Alice Cooper, when he's performing, he's doing the job. When he leaves that stage, he gets cleaned up and he goes home to his wife.
Hold on a second. You just brought up something very important that we forgot to mention when we were talking about Welcome to My Nightmare. So let me go over that real quick.
Go ahead.
So the stage show for Welcome to My Nightmare, because Alice Cooper was going even more into the theatrical side of the performance, even more into the shock part of shock rock, there was backup dancers that got hired to help with the stage show. And long story short, Alice Cooper fell in love with one and got married to her, and they've basically been married to this day. Although, and we'll talk about this in part 2, there was a time that nearly came to an end. So I had to throw that in there. But yeah, getting back to what we're talking about here, Alice Cooper is very different than what he portrays on stage. He is a committed Christian, and yes, he did. I mean, it was well documented. He did stray from his faith, unfortunately, through the late 70s and especially in the early 80s, as we'll talk about when we get to the quote-unquote blackout period. But in the aftermath of that, when he cleaned up, he rededicated his life to Jesus Christ, and it's been that way ever since.
Give him credit. The man's been married longer than some people that we know or that are alive. That's a credit in itself. Now, think about that. They got married, I think, around 74, 75.
Yeah. Let's see. Welcome to My Nightmare came out in 75. So I would say 75, 76.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So he's about, married 50 years. How many people can you say that are married 50 years?
And here's the crazy part, too. His wife is also a pastor's child.
Yep. Now, they almost had a divorce in 83. And they went through all the paperwork, but they reconciled. So,
right. We'll talk about that when we get to the album Dad.
But think about that. What this man went through and did and achieved, everything like that. And to be married for almost 50 years, you have to remember, before that, '60s, before the '60s, you could say that was common. People married and stayed married that long.
Mm-hmm.
Getting in the '60s and the '70s, and definitely in the '80s, and in modern times today, people get married, 10 people get married, 9 get divorced. Maybe 1 out of 10 might last that long. And I might even say 1 out of 20 in today's world. It's a miracle that here in 2024, uh, somebody in entertainment has been married that long. And quote unquote from him, this
Mm-hmm.
is coming from Alice Cooper. He never cheated on his wife.
Right.
Never cheated on, but then again, she's with him. So he wanted to. That ain't happening. So yeah. But maybe he's happy and she's happy. They make each other happy and the diamond's in the rough. So give it to him.
That is true. But anyways, getting back to Lace and Whiskey though, really not much more I can say about it. My ranking for it is definitely the lowest one that we're talking about of this list. I give it a 5.5 out of 10 just because to me the instrumentals and the just overblown production of all of it is really overbearing. Best song is definitely My God, so I agree. However, My God also the song has a major flaw to it production wise is that the instruments to me, at least the way I was listening to it in my AirPods, completely drowned out Alice Cooper's voice. So I could barely understand what he was saying. So on the whole, would I spend money on Lace and Whiskey? No.
I would say for me, rating the album, I will give it a 5. Uh, while it's better than the first 2 albums, it's not better than the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Bob Ezrin's first. I don't want to say flop, but
But it's a misfire.
it's a misfire. And again, he'll have definitely an even bigger misfire with the Elder. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what this end up selling, but yeah, this is Bob Ezrin, and he has his own demons with the white powder. So
Yeah.
definitely at the time, again, don't forget he's spread thin. One producer, and you want the popularity, you want the jobs, but he's hitting on all cylinders. Kiss, Pink Floyd, Alice Cooper, and yeah, I guess it catches up to him. Some people think, well, I'll do the job and I don't have to do the actual work, so it'll be a hit anyway. And it
Right.
doesn't work that way. And sadly, this is his first, but he doesn't learn from it. And I'm not talking Alice Cooper, I'm talking Bob Ezrin.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what direction they were going with this album. I do not know what they were thinking about this album. You know, I mean, yeah, I could deal with listening to My God. That's one of my favorite Alice Cooper songs. The only other song I can deal with is Lace and Whiskey. Other than that, it's definitely another album that shouldn't have been made. It just
I
shouldn't have been.
100%
Even I
agree.
don't even think you could polish this up. I think the best thing that could have happened is that Alice Cooper took 2 years off and maybe with work combined certain songs from Goes to Hell and Lace and Whiskey, really work on them better
Mm-hmm.
and produce them a little bit better. You might have had a gold record. But yeah, the quality isn't there. It's definitely not in the league of Welcome to My Nightmare.
Right. It's not even in the league, in my opinion, of Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. Again, Mr. Boschtex here says it hit number 60 on the charts, where Alice Cooper Goes to Hell hit 27. So
Yep.
that's pretty bad comparatively. It's also worth noting, by the way, and this is how we transition into the next album. that by this point Alice was really bad with drinking. And he released a live album and sort of a live concert thing too, a TV special, where it was blatantly obvious that he had a problem with alcohol. And so what does he do? But he realizes he has a problem, and he checks himself into a facility for his alcoholism. And from that births the last album we're going to talk about tonight, From the Inside. So this is another concept album, but this one is about Alice singing the songs from the inside of an insane asylum.
Yeah. Little note here. This is 1978.
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood, entertainment as a whole. You either have a drinking or a cocaine problem, or you have both. Well, Alice Cooper had a drinking problem. He had
Hey, Matt. Thanks for popping in. Bill's favorite Alice Cooper performance was Country Roads.
Here's the thing of people who he hanged around with, his drinking buddies. Keith Moon, who'll eventually die within a couple of years.
And Jim Morrison also, right?
Yeah. John Bottom potentially dies in a couple of years. And occasionally, the infamous Bill Ward. These are people that, if you were to squeeze them, alcohol would probably come out, even today.
Yes.
Not saying they're drinking today, but they're paying the price.
And just as a side note, we talked about this, of course, in private, Phil. It is a miracle. Like everyone goes crazy about how it's a miracle that Ozzy is still alive. It's a miracle that Bill Ward is still alive, as much as he drank.
I would tell you this: compare them all, they couldn't outdrink Alice Cooper. Quote unquote, the man said he could drink 3 in a day, 3 cases of beer, and a bottle of whiskey.
Wow,
that's a lot. And if he was doing that for, let's say, he was been that way since 73.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking heavy. 4 or 5, 6 years. You pay a price. You might not pay your price when you're in your 20s. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But if Alice Cooper was to do the Bill Ward, Ward's health is bad. It was bad even 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Because of drinking.
He had an outright heart attack during the 99 reunion.
The liver destroys all some alcoholics, like I said, God bless them. I'm not demeaning them in any way. But you destroy your liver. And it might not happen right away. For some people it does, more quicker than others, but over time. So, people like Alice Cooper, Bill Ward, and other people, they're now in their, some of them are in their late 60s, some are in their late 70s.
Alice Cooper is for sure in his 70s.
And some of them are paying the price. I don't know what intervention happened spiritually, earthly. They got Alice Cooper to clean up when he did. It was good that he cleaned up when he did.
Mm-hmm.
And we can speak about other people and their problems. Alice Cooper is 78 years old. 78. It's a miracle. If you were to told people from 1975 to like 1983 that Alice Cooper is going to make it that long, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think honestly, and everyone can say what they believe about this, but I think honestly, he has made it as long as he has because God's been protecting him.
Like I said, you don't know. Look, Keith Moon might have been a great guy, good guy, but it's known that he had an alcohol problem
Hmm.
and probably other problems, but I definitely know he had an alcohol problem. John Bonham had alcohol problem. You know,
Yeah.
there's people that have been in the music industry that literally drank themselves to death. I believe the singer from Warrant ended up dying in a motel room from drinking too much. You know,
Right.
and you have to remember sometimes when people die, they don't, famous people, they don't give you the reasons. Not all the time do they give you the reasons, but sometimes stuff comes out. But give credit to Alice Cooper. He has said he's been an alcoholic, was an alcoholic, and God bless him. He's been clean for now decades, you
Hmm.
know. But look at some of his friends. Ace Frehley. My man, just like he has the blackout years, I'm pretty sure Ace really has the blackout years.
Yeah.
But
And look at Ace Frehley today.
yeah,
I mean, how he is still going on stage is a miracle. But then again, you can tell that he is declining.
yeah. Well, it take eventually not just being old age, but your body takes a toll. You
Hmm.
can't put stuff in your body and not expect it to react and change. You know, like I said, man, it's there's some people that drink and they live till great old age. All right,
Yeah.
it's the roll of the dice, really.
Yeah.
But most of his drinking buddies that he came out in the '70s, most of them passed.
Yeah.
There's very
That's
few that of his friends that from the '70s. I'm not talking '80s and '90s or 2000s, but from the '70s. Most of his drinking buddies are people he hanged with. You know, not just Ace Frehley hang with Belushi. You know, I'm not saying Alice Cooper did the cocaine, but that was a buddy, and
well,
you know,
we'll get to that again when we come to the next set of albums. But for this one, From the Inside, Alice realized he had a problem, and so he checked himself into a facility to help him get clean. I don't know what the appropriate word here is to use, a sanatorium, an asylum, whatever, but some form of facility to help him get clean. And he decided to base From the Inside off of kind of his experiences in that. Like the idea of a rock star that is in an insane asylum and is singing these songs in the asylum. And this is another concept album, kind of like Alice Cooper Goes to Hell, where, at least to me, the concept is easy to understand, and therefore I come away enjoying it more than, say, Welcome to My Nightmare. And so my ranking for that one is 8 out of 10. And for me, the best song is another ballad, much like I Never Cry, and it's the one that he wrote for his wife called How You Gonna See Me Now. And would I spend money on this album? Yes.
I would say again, if you're a diehard Alice Cooper fan, this you have to you don't want an incomplete collection,
Hmm.
so you would have to get it. For the casual Alice Cooper fan or somebody that might listen to here and there, not worth your time a day. There's nothing on this album that I could say, yeah, uh, I would say this album, like, there's not even a close to a single, and there's not, and I like Alice Cooper. I can listen to this album, but I can never listen to it again, and it wouldn't bother me none. Uh,
Right.
there's just nothing here for me. Um, I'm stretching it by giving him a 5. I'm giving it a 5, and that's really pushing it. Uh, the name Alice Cooper is what's saving it for going to a 4. But
Give
You
it a
know,
4 if you got to, man. I
no, I'll
understand.
give it a 5. I'll give it a 5. Like I said, you can listen to it, and if you're a fan, a diehard fan, you know, diehards, everything and everything, you got to digest it.
Hmm.
Casual Alice Cooper fans, you can skip albums, and this one is one you can skip. You know, and sadly, uh, the last three, everything since Welcome to My Nightmare, it to me, it's like some form, some way. I'm not saying he should quit. He should have quit and not make music, but he
Hmm.
should have took a break. He needed a break. He needed time out, and maybe took 2 or 3 years before coming up with an album. Rather than keep trying, and I know he's doing it because he has a record contract and they're pushing for him, but it's not working. It's just not working at all. So yeah.
One other thing that I want to mention with this album, because it kind of sets up the next block too, especially the next four, is this album is more synthesizer heavy than the last few albums for sure. And the next four albums aren't even really rock and roll for Alice Cooper. Just to set the expectation of what we're covering next, the next four albums not only are quote unquote the blackout albums for him, but they're not rock and roll either. They're new wave. But this album starts to ever so slightly go into that new wave sort of direction because there's more um, there's more synthesizers put in place and certain. Now I'll be okay. So I'll be honest. I'm not the biggest. I'm barely knowledgeable on new wave music in general, but I know, like for example, "Sweet Dreams Are Made of These." That's an example of new wave, and there are some songs on From the Inside that kind of remind me of that.
Well,
Like for
let me
example, The
let
Quiet
me
Room.
let me let me help you with this. You know, 78 is a cutoff. All right,
Hmm.
you're dealing with disco. All right, disco is at its height. Disco has a run of 5 years, and then it's like total revolt. People just hated it afterwards, within a couple of months after that 5 years. So, music, the rock and roll music, kind of went through for what people went through with grunge. You know, you had
Hmm.
your hair bands in the 80s, and that was a long streak there, ruling MTV, ruling the music industry, ruling everything. And by 1989, 1990, you didn't need grunge to put a nail in the coffin. They were already long in the tooth. The quality wasn't there. Uh,
Hmm.
Bands were breaking up and getting solo contracts and all this other stuff. And then grunge comes along and just takes the bottom out of the floor. All right.
Right.
Well, you had kind of similar thing reaction going from the end of the 70s and into the 80s. You know, Kiss, Alice Cooper, the old school, you know, they're out.
Hmm.
Van Halen, Journey was big. Let's see.
Sabbath completely, at least the original band of Sabbath, completely
Yes,
imploded
but
in
they at least
'78.
when they had Dio, they were still able to maintain what they had.
Right.
Okay? Still, they were still platinum albums.
Hmm.
Like Kiss and Alice Cooper, you see, they paid the price for it.
Right.
And other bands did too. Aerosmith paid the price for it. It wasn't nothing they did. It was nothing that was done. It's just that what was great a year or two ago when they had a long streak is no longer great. All right. Uh, you know, like I said, Aerosmith, Kiss, All these people were pushed to the side.
Mm-hmm.
Here's AC/DC. Here's Van Halen. Um, Ozzy.
Here's the new wave of British heavy metal.
Yeah, Ozzy by himself. Here
Mm-hmm.
comes Quiet
Motorhead.
Riot. Here comes Def Leppard. You know, so you'll see like from 79 to about 83, 84, them 4 years were hard times for these people. But then you see the resurgence of them people. You can even
Mm-hmm.
throw in there Heart. Heart had a hard time also in the early 80s, very early 80s, you
Yeah.
know. But talk 4 years later, uh, yeah, Kiss makes a resurgence. Alice Cooper makes a resurgence. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they make it. Okay. And that's kind of something similar that happens in the mid 90s. Grunge fades after 5 years, and you see a form, not you ain't hair bands anymore, but you see the hair bands come somewhat back with
Yeah.
a different look, but playing rock and roll like they should have been. And there's actually a resurgence. So, I think it's a cycle in the music. Every couple of years, they need something new, but then after that something new takes form, it fades out, and then they want what they originally had before it. So, and I think that's a similar thing, but it doesn't mean that Alice Cooper and his alcohol problems, Kiss with the lineup changes, Black Sabbath eventually going through their own problems because they couldn't even keep Dio there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, there's, a change, you know, sometimes for good or for ill. But for, like I said, when you see Alice Cooper, I mean, I'll be honest, as an Alice Cooper fan, between that time from Welcome to My Nightmare to Constrictor, I could take it or leave it. I'm just being
Yeah.
honest. I mean,
And
talking with you, I can talk about it. But as a diehard Alice Cooper fan that I am, I could really tell you, Paul, it's even hard to even talk about these albums because there's no quality. I could see if there was a little bit of quality. There's not even quality. It's like the companies, the record companies asking for an album, so he has to deliver. But it's like lack of effort, and you can blame Alice Cooper, but then you can't always blame him for all of it because he does have Bob Ezrin most of the time, and he's striking out. So
yeah,
what's he to do? He doesn't have the Alice Cooper band. He's suffering from alcoholism, so he's not
and soon to be
firing.
suffering from an addiction to crack too.
Yeah, it's so you know this is a prime example. Maybe Alice Cooper after 76, after Welcome to My Nightmare tour, probably should have took time off to get his life straightened out and hold off doing an album and a tour for 2 years. You
Yeah.
know, that might have hurt him financially with the record company, but I mean, what he's throwing out there, couldn't see how the record company could be happy. And I'll be honest, I know the record company has to throw it out there because they need to try to make their money back for whatever they're paying him for the record. But you know, none of these albums are making a dent. So,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, it's painful. It's painful. Kiss only had the one. Well, you can actually do Unmasked, which I did like, and The Elder. Well, Alice Cooper has a longer streak than Kiss when it comes to misfirings, and this misfiring is a very long period. Like I said, the 4 or 5 years that he's going through right here, not even a gold record.
Yeah. Raymond Boschek here says Alice should have got the original band back together. Well, I think with that, we're going to go ahead and close it out tonight.
Mhm.
So real quick, let's go ahead and set the date for what that's going to be. So Monday, June 3rd is when we're going to wrap up Return of the King. So the following Monday after that, June 10th, is when we will do part 2 of our Alice Cooper retrospective, and that's going to be from the year 1980 to the year 2001. So from Flush the Fashion to Dragontown.
I will say this just so for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get through this run of records and we get from to Constrictor, it's daylight. And I know some of these albums after Constrictor, there's quite a few that are ballpark home runs. And in some of mine, there's some of these albums that are coming in the future after Constrictor that are not that great. I will take every not so great after Constrictor than any of these albums between Welcome to My Nightmare and Constrictor that was made. It's
Yeah.
just, you want to. It's sad if you don't see how a person suffering through addiction and being around people that have an addiction. I question the record company. I I would question Alice Cooper's if he had a manager, and
He
definitely
did around this time. He still apparently had Shep Gordon.
well, like I said, I think that they were just trying to draw upon the name. But
Mm-hmm.
really, I'm being honest. I'm saying this. These albums really drag him down, and they do more. There's no good from this. No good from this. And like I said, unless you're an Alice Cooper diehard, these albums aren't there, man. Are not there. And I feel sorry for him, you know. Uh, I would even tell people, even diehards will probably say, you have to be an extreme diehard to want these albums. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, with that, guys, we're gonna go ahead and end it tonight. Like I said, Monday, June 10th is when part 2 is gonna be, and that's gonna be from Flush the Fashion to Dragontown. So we've got a great number of albums, a lot of great albums, but also, especially these next 4, from what I've heard, a lot of really bad stuff coming up. So make sure you guys like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of this. Friday, our open panel discussion is going to be how our history affects our entertainment. So definitely tune in for that one. And then, yeah, it's all going to be fun times from here. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Phil, of course, for coming on here and doing this with me. And for you guys watching, make sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. And we will talk to you later.